It's the height of the monsoon season in Vietnam. A platoon of U.S. troops marches quietly through the dense jungle, soaked to the bone and ankle-deep in mud. Suddenly, a whistle of a mortar round shrieks through the air. It's an ambush. Wasting no time, men drop to the ground as bullets start to whiz over their heads. The platoon leader shouts orders, trying to calm his men. Amid the chaos, they return fire, shooting at shadowy figures moving between the trees. As the battle intensifies, the soldiers fight with more and more determination. They cover each other, firing in turns and moving from tree to tree. Fear spreads through their bones, but they know one thing: they must fight till their last breath and fight with everything they have. It's the only way to survive the Highlands of Vietnam. Like every year, in late spring of 1967, the southwest monsoon brought rains and typhoons to the eastern slopes of the mountains and lowland plains and central areas of South Vietnam. Usually this meant a slower pace of military options, but not this time. Despite the challenging weather conditions, the command of the North Vietnamese People's Army, or PAVN, decided to intensify its actions. Starting in May, they launched a significant buildup of their forces in base areas 701 and 702 on the Cambodian border with South Vietnam and in the vicinity of the city of Pleiku. This buildup aimed to draw American forces to the border regions, where the PAVN troops could take advantage of the challenging terrain and thick jungle and inflict severe casualties on them. Even though in the previous 2 years, American forces launched 3 military campaigns to eliminate the North Vietnamese presence in the region, the enemy was stronger than ever. They built a well-organized structure with the B3 front in charge, equipped with sapper and artillery units, and supported by several Viet Cong and independent North Vietnamese battalions. The B3 front controlled 6 main force regiments. These included the 32nd, 66th, and 88th Infantry Regiments of the 1st PAVN Division, which had the experience of fighting the Americans during Operation Sam Houston. Apart from them, B3 Front also had at its disposal 3 other independent regiments, the 24th, 95B, and 33rd, spread across provinces inside the South Vietnamese territory, thus spreading the operation's reach of the front. Eventually, these 6 regiments were joined by a 7th regiment, the 174th, which teamed up with the 24th in Kon Tum. The border in this region was guarded by the U.S. 4th Infantry Division under the command of General William Ray Pierce. The division had just completed Operation Sam Houston in early April, right as the dry season ended, and was fully aware of the ongoing North Vietnamese buildup. With this knowledge and recognizing the threat of such strong enemy formation, General Pierce decided to launch a new campaign, Operation Francis Marion. This operation, planned to commence on April 6, 1967, was essentially a direct continuation of Sam Houston with the same goal to counter the expected enemy movements. For the operation, General Pierce engaged the 1st and 2nd Brigades of the 4th Division, each comprising 3 infantry battalions. The 1st Brigade consisted of the 1st and 3rd Battalion, 8th Infantry and 3rd Battalion, 12th Infantry, while the 2nd Brigade had the 1st Battalion, 12th Infantry, 1st Battalion, 22nd Infantry, and 2nd Battalion, 8th Infantry. The 1st Brigade was deployed in a defensive arc about 20 kilometers east of the Cambodian border along Route 14B, with positions stretching from the Special Forces camp at New Plei Jurang to Duc Co and down to Plei Mai. This setup was designed to detect and engage the enemy before they could infiltrate deeper into South Vietnamese territory. Special Forces teams, the Civilian Irregular Defense Group (CIDG), and the division's own long-range patrol companies were tasked with searching for signs of the enemy. In case of significant enemy activity, the 2nd Brigade, which was held in reserve at the Oasis base camp, would jump into action. South Vietnamese Army units extended this screen, with units of the 23rd Division in the south in Dar Loc Province and a non-divisional South Vietnamese regiment, the 42nd, to the north in Kon Tum Province. This strategic depth was crucial, as the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong were known for their ability to exploit the rugged jungle-covered terrain for ambushes and quick strikes. By establishing a strong defensive line and maintaining vigilant reconnaissance, General Pierce aimed to prevent the enemy from using their traditional tactics of hit-and-run attacks, which could lead to significant American and South Vietnamese casualties. As soon as Operation Francis Marion started, the North Vietnamese increased their operations in western Pleiku and northern Darlock provinces. In the beginning, these encounters involved only small groups, but by mid-April, the situation escalated when special forces clashed with the North Vietnamese battalion in northern Darlock. A few days later, 2 Viet Cong companies were spotted near the Bon Blec Special Forces camp. It was a signal that a significant enemy force was present in the area. In response, General Pierce sent a battalion task force from the 1st Brigade into northern Darlock on April 24th. He also repositioned his forces to strengthen the defense line along Route 14B and moved the 2nd Brigade to the region around Plain Special Forces camp. As the 2nd Brigade moved into place, a company from the 2nd Battalion, 8th Infantry, initiated a sweep patrol north of Plei Mai. During the patrol, the company engaged a small Pavan group and forced them to retreat to their nearby camp. Despite artillery and airstrikes and assaults of the M113 armored personnel carriers which arrived at the scene, the North Vietnamese held their ground. The following morning, American troops brought in more armor, including 2 tanks, but by that time the enemy had fled the camp under the cover of darkness. The pursuit led the company armor to yet another enemy base held by the men of the 95B Regiment. The Pavan troops launched a fierce attack, throwing grenades against the advancing American tracks. However, there was little they could do against the deadly salvos of canister shots and machine gun fire. The clash ended with 138 dead North Vietnamese soldiers. The area around Plei Mai quieted down after this battle. However, the attention only shifted to the north near Duc Co. There, American forces repelled a battalion-sized attack on May 1st. A captured enemy soldier revealed that 2 battalions of the Pavan 66 Regiment had recently entered South Vietnam planning further attacks, including one on the Special Forces camp at Duc Co scheduled for June 6th. Convinced an attack was near, General Pierce ordered preemptive B-52 raids and ground probes near a camp. After the bombing was over, he ordered 2 units of the 1st Brigade to be dispatched to the bombed area to search for enemy presence. These were the 1st Battalion of the 8th Infantry and the 3rd Battalion of the 12th Infantry. Despite the proximity border and reliable information that the enemy held large troops in the area, the 1st Battalion saw no sign of the enemy. On May 18th, however, the battalion's Bravo company spotted a lone Vietnamese soldier wandering the jungle. The company commander ordered his 4th platoon to capture the soldier. Unknowingly, he sent his men straight into an enemy ambush. A seemingly insignificant incident was about to erupt into notorious 9 days in May border battles. Chasing after the North Vietnamese soldiers, the 4th platoon ran straight into a prepared ambush. Surrounded by 700 enemy soldiers, the platoon was struck by heavy small arms and automatic weapons fire from 3 sides. Sergeant First Class Bruce Allen Grandstaff, commanding the platoon, tried to pull back but was pinned down by enemy fire. He had no other choice but to establish a defensive perimeter and call for artillery support. However, calling in an artillery strike in the middle of the jungle was an extremely difficult task due to the thick forest canopy. Even the helicopter gunships that arrived at the scene had trouble pinpointing the friendly platoon's exact location. In order to help them direct the fire, Grandstaff crawled outside the defensive position to mark the location with a smoke grenade. Unfortunately, neither this nor the other smoke didn't penetrate the canopy foliage. Seriously wounded in the leg, Grandstaff called in artillery strikes even closer to his perimeter as the enemy was closer and closer. Then, once again, he jumped out from his position, now with an idea to shoot tracer rounds into the air to mark the location for gunships. This time he succeeded, but drew even more fire to him, earning another leg wound. Wounded in both legs and bleeding heavily, Grandstaff then crawled to the enemy machine gun that was putting pressure on his men and destroyed it with grenades. Despite the ultimate bravery shown, Grandstaff couldn't stop the enemy assaults. In his final message, he called in an artillery strike directly on his location. It was just a few moments before he was mortally wounded by an enemy RPG. In the meantime, the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Gannon, ordered companies Alpha and Bravo to reinforce the surrounded platoon. However, it wasn't until sunset when both companies arrived on the battlefield, only to find a terrible scene. Grandstaff was dead, along with 21 of his soldiers. 1 soldier was missing and another 8 were wounded. Surviving soldiers had a dreadful story to tell. Once the North Vietnamese reached their positions, they had to play dead while they searched their bodies for trophies. All those who showed some signs of life were shot at the spot. They were also told of the extraordinary bravery of their platoon commander, Sergeant First Class Bruce Allen Grandstaff, who was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Around the perimeter, American soldiers also found bodies of 119 enemy soldiers, who, judging by their uniforms, belonged to the Pavan 32nd Regiment. That same night, that same unit launched another attack on the American night defensive position, but was repulsed by precise and heavy artillery fire. As a precautionary measure, the following day, 4 B-52 sorties bombed the area. Division HQ was surely aware that there were going to be more attacks like this, and undoubtedly they were right. 2 days later, the 3rd Battalion of the 12th Infantry was attacked with mortar fire as they were about to break camp. The barrage was followed by a human wave attack of a battalion-sized enemy unit. Despite the powerful artillery support, American soldiers had to repel enemy attacks for 2 hours. Only after the morning mist lifted, they could call in fighter bombers and helicopter gunships to chase away the enemy. The battalion suffered 10 dead and 77 wounded. They counted 79 dead enemies who belonged to the Pavan 66th Regiment. A break in the fighting came on May 23rd due to the holiday of Buddha's birthday. This didn't mean that the two sides were idle in their activities. The 1st Battalion was replaced with the 3rd Battalion of the same 8th Infantry. The 1st Brigade commander, Colonel Charles A. Jackson, deployed it along with the 3rd 12th Infantry into the area of the Chugunyo Mountains, where he believed the enemy was building up his forces. Already on May 24th, the 12th Infantry's battalion was attacked as they prepared the pickup site for the helicopters. The bitter fighting lasts for an hour, but the Americans repelled the enemy attack. At the same time, Charlie Company of the 3rd 8th Infantry suffered a rather unusual attack. As they moved through the jungle, a sniper shot killed the company commander, followed by the enemy attack. After repulsing the assault, the Americans concentrated on the snipers, blowing most of them out of the trees with M79 grenade launchers. Only when the firefight stopped did soldiers realize all their officers were either killed or wounded. North Vietnamese snipers targeted them on purpose, leaving Master Sergeant Richard Childers to lead the besieged unit. Battalion Commander Colonel Tom Lynch ordered Bravo Company to join the besieged force. Guided only by the sounds of battle, Bravo Company managed to find Charlie in the middle of the thick jungle. The fighting was relentless, but the two companies managed to hold out. This time the jungle was on their side. Thick canopy detonated most of the enemy mortar rounds, sparing them from their deadly shrapnels. Also, the thick foliage prevented North Vietnamese soldiers from precisely locating their targets. In one instance, 50 Pavan soldiers walked to the point-blank range from American soldiers without noticing them. A precise and devastating fire from American weapons sent them all to death. The battle raged until artillery and gunships finally broke the enemy's embrace. This allowed the men of both companies to retreat to the safety of Hill 521. When they returned to the battlefield later that afternoon, they found 96 enemy bodies. It was the last big fight of the 9 days in May. During that period, American soldiers killed 367 enemies while losing 6 times fewer men. The ratio was likely even higher, as it only accounted for bodies that the North Vietnamese did not recover. Also, in the same period, B-52 bombers had made 14 strikes with unknown results. Despite the significant casualties, the North Vietnamese were far from losing the fight. They remained persistent in their tactical approach of maintaining steady pressure on the Americans, regardless of how high their losses were. The fighting in the second half of May only assured the Division HQ that the area was swarming with the enemy and that they would need more firepower to deal with them. In the last days of May, the 173rd Airborne Brigade arrived to reinforce the 4th Division. General Pierce now had 3 brigades operating near the battle: the 1st Brigade to the north, the 2nd Brigade in the center around Duc Co, and the 173rd to the south. However, as May came to an end, so did the hostilities. The period of heavy fighting was followed by a 2-week lull, after which the battle for the Highlands shifted north to the Kon Province. After a quiet June, American electronic intelligence noted an increased enemy activity in the 2nd Brigade sector. The immediate response was the deployment of 2 B-52 strikes on July 10th, after which General Pierce ordered the 1st Battalion of the 12th Infantry to investigate the results. On July 11th, under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Corey J. Wright, Companies B and C of the battalion headed into an area targeted by B-52 bombings. They reached the strike zone around noon, finding it littered with bomb craters but no enemy forces. The companies then moved east to set up defensive perimeters for the night. The following day, a patrol from Charlie Company encountered a small North Vietnamese force, killing 3 and scattering the rest. Shortly after, the company spotted a group of 30 enemy soldiers and called in artillery and mortar fire. Colonel Wright directed Charlie Company's scouting platoon to move towards Bravo Company to avoid the friendly fire. However, as they moved, they ran into another much larger North Vietnamese force, which managed to surround them. In an attempt to rescue them, the Bravo Company commander dispatched a platoon, which also came under heavy attack. Now, there were 2 platoons stuck in the middle of the jungle and pinned down by enemy fire. Due to low clouds and heavy rain, Lieutenant Colonel Wright was unable to call in air support effectively. He could only direct it from afar, hoping that the platoon leaders could adjust it by sound. As soon as the weather cleared enough for Wright to fly above the battlefield in a command helicopter, he coordinated both companies to attempt a breakout, guiding them with smoke grenades and continuing artillery and mortar support. However, as the companies advanced, Company B's command group was hit by mortar fire, fatally wounding the company commander. In a matter of hours, the company was once again endangered by enemy fire and was in dire need of help. Unfortunately, the forward air controller requested the artillery fire to stop and make way for the airstrikes, despite the strong objection of Lieutenant Fred Bragg, who took over command of the surrounded company. As he expected, the airstrikes inflicted no damage to the enemy, but only allowed them to press even more in the absence of artillery support. Eventually, the Bravo Company received reinforcements, forcing the North Vietnamese to withdraw across the border into Cambodia. The aftermath of the engagement was grim. The investigation into an effective B-52 strike that cost the 1st Battalion 31 dead, 34 wounded, and 7 missing. Of these 7, 6 were repatriated only after the war's end, while 1 soldier was never found. On the other side, the battalion HQ reported killing 142 regulars from the 66th Pavan Regiment. August and September of 1967 brought another lull in activities along the Cambodian border, as if both sides were exhausted by the previous fighting. On September 24th, General Pears launched the final phase of the operation aimed to cut the enemy infiltration route in the Dak Paya U Valley, southeast of Pleiku City. The operation resulted in only one significant counter on October 1st, when helicopter gunships engaged a group of North Vietnamese troops moving along a trail. On October 11th, General William Bradford Rawson, commander of the 1 Field Force, declared Operation Francis Marion over. During 6 months of the campaign, the 4th Division claimed to have killed or captured over 1,600 enemy soldiers, at a cost of about 300 American and 100 South Vietnamese dead. Although the numbers speak in favor of American victory, the North Vietnamese B-3 front succeeded in its intentions to tie down and disperse large American and South Vietnamese forces. This called General Pears and Rawson to question the effectiveness of the border engagement. They started thinking about changing their approach for future operations, especially because the 4th Infantry Division was about to lose 10,000 men to the 1-year rotation policy, which would be replaced by inexperienced soldiers and officers. However, the end of the monsoon season left no time for American commanders to reconsider their approaches and prepare fresh troops for combat. By the end of October, the North Vietnamese B-3 front had slipped its 32nd and 66th regiments through the border. Along with the 241st and 174th regiments, these large Pavan forces would launch a new attack on American forces around the Dak To base. The war in Vietnam was about to escalate into even more ferocity. Thanks for watching this episode. If you liked it, please comment and share. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content. Stay tuned.